In a quiet little town where everyone knew each other's stories, there lived a woman who preferred living a simple life. She wasn't flashy or loud. She just went about her days with kindness and humility. This woman had an old car that had been with her through thick and thin. It was reliable, but after years of loyal service, it started showing its age, sputtering at stoplights and making strange noises on the highway. One sunny afternoon, she decided it was finally time for a change. Saving up bit by bit over months, she managed to put together enough money to explore buying something new, or at least newer. With butterflies in her stomach, she drove down to the fanciest car dealership in town. The lot gleamed under the sunlight, rows upon rows of sleek vehicles sparkling like jewels. But as soon as she stepped out of her beaten-up sedan, wearing her usual jeans and sweater, she could feel eyes on her. The salespeople milling around seemed more interested in chatting with each other than helping customers. Finally, one man walked over to her. A tall guy with slicked back hair and an air of superiority. His name tag read Greg. He looked her up and down before speaking, his tone dripping with condescension. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his expression made it clear he already doubted she belonged there. She smiled politely and explained how she wanted to see if anything might fit within her budget. Maybe something small. Or perhaps they offered financing options. Instead of listening, Greg let out a laugh so sharp it felt like a slap. "Lady," he said, leaning casually against a shiny sports car, "this place isn't for people like you." Her cheeks burned red as embarrassment washed over her. She tried to explain that she was serious, that she worked hard for what she had, but Greg cut her off again. "Look, why don't you try somewhere else? You're wasting your time here." Those words hit harder than she expected. Feeling small and defeated, she turned around and left, tears pricking the corners of her eyes as she climbed back into her old car. As she drove away, she couldn't shake off the sting of being treated like she didn't matter. What Greg didn't know, and what no one in that dealership realized, was that this seemingly ordinary woman wasn't alone. Back home, waiting for her call, was someone who wouldn't stand for such disrespect. Someone powerful. Someone who loved her deeply and would do anything to protect her pride. Little did Greg and his colleagues know, their actions were about to set off a chain reaction they'd never see coming. The woman drove home in silence, replaying the scene at the dealership over and over in her mind. The way Greg had laughed at her, the dismissive tone, the way he made her feel invisible, it all weighed heavily on her heart. By the time she pulled into her driveway, she was fuming. How dare they treat her like that? She worked hard for every penny she earned, and no one had the right to make her feel small. As soon as she stepped inside, she picked up the phone and dialed her husband. He was away on business but always made time for her when she needed him. When he answered, his deep, calm voice immediately put her at ease. "Hey, love," he said warmly. "How's your day going?" She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Not great," she admitted, and just like that, the floodgates opened. She told him everything, the condescending remarks, the laughter, the way she'd been humiliated in front of everyone. Her voice cracked as she described how she'd left the dealership feeling like she wasn't good enough. On the other end of the line, her husband listened quietly. At first, he didn't say much, but she could hear his breathing change, slowly, steadily, like he was trying to keep his emotions in check. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. His tone was gentle but firm. "No one should ever treat you like that," he said. "You deserve respect, no matter where you go or what you wear." She appreciated his words, but she didn't expect him to do anything drastic. After all, it wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her because of her appearance. But this time felt different. This time, something inside him snapped. "Listen," he continued, his voice now laced with determination. "I'm going to handle this. Tomorrow, I'll take care of it." Before she could ask what he meant, he assured her everything would be okay and told her to get some rest. Though she still felt hurt, hearing his unwavering support lifted a weight off her shoulders. That night, while she slept, her husband sat at his desk, scrolling through files and making calls. He wasn't just any man. He was someone who had built an empire from scratch, someone who knew how to get things done. And more importantly, he loved his wife fiercely. Seeing her upset ignited a fire in him that wouldn't die down until justice was served. He instructed his assistant to dig up everything they could find about the dealership. its owners, employees, financial records, customer complaints, anything that might give him leverage. By morning, he had a full dossier on the place, complete with evidence of shady practices and unethical behavior. Armed with this information, he devised a plan that would not only avenge his wife, but also send a message loud and clear: no one messes with his family. The next day, dressed in a sharp suit that screamed authority, he walked into the dealership ready to confront them head-on. He didn't shout or threaten. Instead, he carried himself with quiet confidence, knowing exactly how powerful he truly was. As he entered the showroom, heads turned. No one recognized him at first, but it didn't take long for them to realize they were dealing with someone far above their pay grade. What happened next would leave the entire staff speechless and teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The next morning, the man walked into the dealership with a presence that commanded attention. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his polished shoes clicking against the glossy floor, he moved like someone who owned the room. The staff, used to dealing with flashy customers or nervous first-time buyers, stopped what they were doing and stared. They didn't recognize him at first. How could they? He wasn't the type to frequent places like this, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made it clear he wasn't just another customer. He approached the front desk, where a young receptionist sat flipping through papers. Without hesitation, he asked to speak with the manager. His tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. "Tell him it's urgent," he added when she hesitated, glancing at her computer screen. She nodded quickly and picked up the phone, whispering something into the receiver. Moments later, the manager appeared, a middle-aged man with a forced smile and a handshake that felt more like a reflex than genuine warmth. "Good morning, sir," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "How can I assist you today?" The man cut straight to the point. "My wife visited here yesterday," he began, his voice steady but edged with steel. "She was treated poorly by one of your salespeople, very poorly." The manager's smile faltered slightly, but he kept his composure. "I'm sorry to hear that," he replied, though his words sounded rehearsed. "If you'd like, we can discuss." "I don't want excuses," the man interrupted, his eyes locking onto the manager's. "I want accountability." Before the manager could respond, Greg, the same salesman who had mocked the woman, walked over, flashing his usual confident grin. He extended his hand, clearly expecting to charm his way out of whatever was happening. "Hi there," he said smoothly. "Can I help you with something?" For a brief moment, the man simply looked at him. Then, without shaking Greg's hand, he introduced himself. "I'm her husband," he said, his tone icy. Greg froze, his smile vanishing as realization dawned on him. For the first time in years, he looked genuinely unsure of himself. The man continued, addressing both Greg and the manager. "Yesterday, my wife came here looking for a car. She was polite, respectful, and honest about her budget. Instead of treating her like a potential customer, your employee laughed at her. He made her feel small, unworthy, and humiliated. That's not how people should be treated." Greg stammered, trying to backtrack. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I would never." "Save it," the man cut him off again, his voice sharp enough to silence Greg instantly. Turning to the manager, he said, "I've done some research about your business. You might want to sit down for this." With that, he gestured toward the lawyers and assistants who had entered the showroom behind him. They carried folders filled with documents, evidence of unethical practices, shady dealings, and even complaints from past customers. The manager's face turned pale as the man laid it all out on the table. "This isn't just about my wife anymore," the man said, his voice low but powerful. "It's about how you run this place. And trust me, if you don't fix this, things are going to get very uncomfortable for you." The room fell silent. Greg shifted uncomfortably, while the manager struggled to find the right words. None of them had expected this turn of events. What started as a simple visit from an angry husband had quickly escalated into something much bigger, and none of them were ready for what came next. The manager's face turned ashen as the man placed the folder on the counter and slid it toward him. "Take a look," the man said, his voice calm but laced with authority. The manager hesitated for a moment before opening the folder. Inside were documents detailing years of unethical practices, false advertising claims, predatory financing schemes, and even lawsuits from customers who felt cheated. There were emails showing shady deals between the owner and suppliers, cutting corners to boost profits. And then there was the tax evasion report, meticulously compiled by the man's team. Greg, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, sweat forming on his forehead. He glanced at the manager, hoping for some kind of guidance, but the manager looked like he'd been caught in a spotlight with nowhere to hide. "How did you?" The manager stammered, unable to finish his question. "I have resources," the man replied simply, his piercing gaze never leaving the manager's face. "And let me be clear, I'm not here to negotiate or argue. I'm here because my wife was disrespected in your establishment. But while I'm at it, I thought I'd dig a little deeper. Turns out, this place has more skeletons in its closet than I expected." The room grew eerily quiet. Even the other salespeople, who had initially been eavesdropping casually, now looked uneasy. No one dared to speak. The weight of the evidence was crushing, and everyone present could feel it. The man leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the counter. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "First, you will issue a public apology to my wife and to every customer who has ever been mistreated here. Second, you will implement strict reforms to ensure this kind of behavior doesn't happen again. If I hear so much as a whisper of disrespect toward any customer in the future, I'll make sure this dealership is shut down permanently." The manager swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Of course, sir. We'll do whatever you say." But the man wasn't done yet. He straightened up and gestured to the rows of gleaming cars surrounding them. Now, about these vehicles, his lips curled into a faint smile that sent chills down Greg's spine. "I'm buying every single car on this lot. Every last one." The manager blinked in disbelief. "All of them?" he asked weakly. "Yes," the man confirmed. "Consider it a donation. These cars are going to charity organizations across the country. Families who need reliable transportation will benefit from them. You can keep the profit, it's yours to lose, but the cars are leaving this lot today." Greg finally found his voice, though it trembled. "Sir, please, I didn't mean." "Save it," the man interrupted sharply, turning his attention to Greg. "You don't get to explain yourself to me. If you want redemption, apologize to my wife directly. Until then, stay out of my sight." With that, the man signaled to his team, who began organizing the paperwork for the massive purchase. The staff scrambled to assist, their earlier arrogance replaced by panic. As the reality of the situation sank in, Greg slumped into a chair, realizing too late that he had underestimated the wrong person. By the time the transaction was complete, the showroom was nearly empty. The once impressive display of luxury vehicles was reduced to an open space, echoing with the sound of hurried footsteps and whispered apologies. The man walked out without another word, leaving behind a dealership in shambles, and a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The next morning, the woman woke up to an unusual quietness in the house. Her husband was already gone. He had left early, saying he had a few things to take care of. She didn't think much of it. He often worked odd hours and kept his plans to himself. But when she stepped outside to grab the newspaper, she froze in her tracks. Parked right in front of their home was a brand new SUV, gleaming under the sunlight. It wasn't flashy or over the top, it was practical yet elegant, the kind of car that said, "I work hard for what I have." A small envelope rested on the windshield, flapping gently in the breeze. Curious, she walked over and picked it up. Inside was a handwritten note. Asterisk, "No one gets away with treating my queen like anything less than royalty." Asterisk. She read the words twice, her heart swelling with emotion. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the car and the note, feeling a mix of gratitude and awe. He hadn't needed to do this. He knew how much the incident at the dealership had hurt her pride, but he did it anyway, because that's who he was, someone who believed in standing up for the people he loved. Later that day, news of the dealership's downfall spread like wildfire through the town. The manager had issued a public apology, not only to the woman but also to every customer who had ever felt mistreated. They announced sweeping changes, mandatory sensitivity training for staff, transparent financing policies, and a promise to treat all customers with respect. Greg, the smug salesman who had mocked her, resigned quietly, unable to face the backlash from both his bosses and the community. But the real shock came when word got out about the man's decision to buy every single car on the lot and donate them to charity. Families struggling to make ends meet suddenly found themselves receiving keys to vehicles they could never have afforded otherwise. Local news stations covered the story, interviewing grateful recipients who spoke about how the cars would change their lives, helping parents get to work, kids get to school, and families stay connected. The woman watched one of these interviews on TV, tears streaming down her face as she listened to a mother talk about finally being able to drive her daughter to doctor appointments. It wasn't just about revenge or teaching someone a lesson. It was about turning something ugly into something beautiful. That's what her husband had done. He hadn't let anger consume him. Instead, he channeled it into making a difference. That evening, when he returned home, she hugged him tightly, unable to put into words how much his actions meant to her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly, not just for the car, but for everything. He smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You deserve to be treated with respect," he said simply. And if they couldn't see that, then they needed a wake-up call. Besides, he added with a wink, "It feels good to do something nice for others while we're at it." As they sat together on the couch later that night, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, she realized something important. Life wasn't just about holding grudges or seeking revenge. It was about finding ways to rise above negativity and create moments of kindness. Her husband had shown her that, and now she felt stronger, prouder, and more loved than ever before. A few weeks later, the town buzzed with excitement as everyone prepared for the annual charity gala. This year, however, there was an extra layer of anticipation in the air. Word had spread about the mysterious donor who had gifted dozens of cars to families in need. People were eager to see if this generous benefactor would make an appearance at the event, where the vehicles were set to be officially handed over. The woman and her husband arrived together, dressed simply but elegantly. They weren't ones for flashy displays, but their presence alone drew attention. As they walked into the grand hall, decorated with twinkling lights and soft music playing in the background, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some attendees recognized them immediately, the couple behind the incredible act of kindness, while others pieced it together when organizers announced their names during the opening remarks. One by one, families stepped onto the stage to receive the keys to their new cars. Each story tugged at heartstrings. A single mother juggling 2 jobs to support her children, a young man caring for his disabled sibling, an elderly couple struggling to afford transportation after medical bills piled up. Every time someone spoke about how much the vehicle meant to them, the room erupted in applause. And every time the woman squeezed her husband's hand a little tighter, overwhelmed by the ripple effect of his actions. Greg, the former salesman from the dealership, sat awkwardly near the back of the room. He hadn't planned on attending. He only came because the manager insisted, but now he wished he hadn't. Watching the gratitude on people's faces made him feel smaller than ever. He couldn't shake the memory of how he treated the woman that day, nor could he forget the icy tone of her husband when he confronted him. Greg knew he couldn't undo what he'd done, but maybe, just maybe, he could start making amends. During a brief intermission, Greg mustered the courage to approach the couple. His hands trembled as he held out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this," he stammered, avoiding eye contact. It's an apology. To you." The woman took the note hesitantly, glancing at her husband before unfolding it. Inside, Greg had written a heartfelt message acknowledging his behavior and promising to do better in the future. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then the woman looked up at Greg and nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry or bitter. It was calm, almost forgiving. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." Her husband added nothing, but his steady gaze told Greg everything he needed to know. This wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about growth. Greg left the gala feeling lighter, resolved to turn over a new leaf. As the evening wound down, the couple stood outside under the stars, watching as recipients drove away in their new cars, honking happily and waving goodbye. The woman leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, smiling softly. "You didn't have to go this far," she murmured. "But I'm glad you did." He kissed the top of her head, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes showing people the right way to live speaks louder than punishing them for doing wrong," he replied. "Besides, seeing those smiles tonight, That's worth more than any revenge. In that moment, they both realized something profound. True power doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from lifting people up. And sometimes, the best way to fight injustice is to replace it with compassion. In the weeks that followed the charity gala, life in the small town began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. The dealership, once known for its arrogance and shady practices, transformed into a place where customers felt valued and respected. True to their word, the manager and his team implemented new policies, transparent pricing, honest communication, and even free workshops to help people understand car financing better. Greg, who had resigned shortly after the incident, found a job at a smaller, family-owned garage. He worked harder than ever, determined to prove he could be better. Slowly but surely, he started earning trust again, not just from his employers, but from himself. The woman, meanwhile, adjusted to her new SUV with pride. It wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of resilience. Whenever she drove past the dealership, she couldn't help but smile, knowing how far things had come since that humiliating day. But more importantly, she felt stronger. The experience taught her that standing up for herself didn't mean she had to do it alone. She had someone by her side who believed in her worth and who showed the world what happened when you underestimated her. As for her husband, he returned to his quiet life of building businesses and solving problems behind the scenes. He didn't seek recognition or applause. His satisfaction came from seeing the impact of his actions. He knew the real victory wasn't in dismantling the dealership, it was in giving back to the community and showing others that kindness could still triumph over cruelty. One evening, as they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, the woman turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think they've really changed?" she asked, referring to the dealership staff. He shrugged, sipping his coffee. "People can change if they want to. What matters is that we gave them a chance to try." She nodded, mulling over his words. After a pause, she added, "And what about Greg? Do you think he'll be okay?" Her husband smiled faintly. "Everyone deserves a second chance. If he's willing to learn from his mistakes, then yeah, I think he'll be fine." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics: the weather, plans for the weekend, the neighbor's dog that kept wandering into their yard, but the underlying message stayed with them both. Life was full of challenges, big and small, but how you responded to those challenges defined who you were. They had faced adversity head-on, not with anger or bitterness, but with grace and purpose, and in doing so, they had inspired others to do the same. Months later, the couple attended another local event, a fundraiser for underprivileged kids. As they mingled with friends and neighbors, they noticed something remarkable. The families who had received the donated cars were thriving. Parents talked about finding better jobs thanks to reliable transportation, while children spoke excitedly about joining sports teams or extracurricular activities they'd missed out on before. One mother approached the couple, tears in her eyes, and thanked them profusely. "You saved us," she said simply. "We didn't know how we'd get through last winter without a car. Now we feel like we can handle anything." The woman hugged her tightly, feeling a lump rise in her throat. These moments reminded her why they had done what they did. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point, it was about creating opportunities for people to build better lives. Her husband stood nearby, watching silently, his arms crossed but a soft smile playing on his lips. He didn't need to say a word. The look in his eyes said it all. By the end of the night, as they drove home under a sky blanketed with stars, the woman leaned her head against the window, lost in thought. "You know," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "I used to think power meant being loud or intimidating. But now I realize it's about using your strength to lift others up." Her husband glanced at her, his smile widening. "That's exactly right," he replied. "Strength isn't about tearing people down, it's about building them up. And love? Love makes sure no one gets left behind." They drove the rest of the way home in silence, content in the knowledge that they had made a difference, not just for themselves, but for everyone whose lives they touched along the way. In a world often clouded by negativity, they chose compassion. And in doing so, they proved that even the simplest acts of kindness could leave the deepest marks.